Hey, this is Ryan Jones with serverlessguru. In this video, we're going to be covering Firebase. So what is Firebase? Why do people use it? How can it help your app? All the things like that. So let's go ahead and jump in. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the documentation for Firebase. So basically what it says, it helps mobile app teams succeed. And it does that by giving a suite of services, everything from databases to analytics to machine learning we'll see more in just a second, but basically what it does is one platform, and all these products fit into this term called Firebase. And so this is provided by Google. It's part of the Google Cloud. And as we can read here, you can build apps fast without managing infrastructure. So if you're familiar with serverless, kind of what we do at this channel is we teach serverless things to developers so that they can kind of break into this new field that's emerging, and it's going to continue to emerge the next 3 to 5 years. And hopefully, continue that path down. So basically, this is a comprehensive mobile development platform. It also works for web applications as well. So inside of here, we have a whole bunch of different things. So the first one that we see is Cloud Firestore. What Cloud Firestore allows you to do is a NoSQL database, and you can store and sync application data at a global scale. So this is something that will scale up to the size of something like Lyft or Uber, and then also down to your startup, right? Or your one-person application. So it's really great. There's also this real-time database down here. So one thing that you may want, and you probably need nowadays, is you need to be able to store and sync your data in milliseconds, right? You need to be able to do it fast, and you need every single device that's using your application be able to be in sync in real time together. And so for that, Firebase has something called a real-time database, and that allows you to basically accomplish this. There's also something called cloud storage. So cloud storage, if you're familiar with AWS or Dropbox or Google Drive, it does the exact same thing. You can store basically blobs of stuff inside of it, so it's blob storage. What that basically means is images, documents, binaries, pretty much anything that you would want to fit inside of something in the cloud so that you can actually use it in your applications. That's cloud storage. There's also hosting. So Firebase Hosting, it allows you to create S3, or sorry, not S3, but hosted websites. They're called static sites. What they do is you write HTML, you write CSS just like normal, and then you have some JavaScript, and all of your actual backend functionality is made through API calls, right? So to accomplish those API calls, there's something called Cloud Functions. So Cloud Functions is just like AWS Lambda, which we've covered in other videos. So Cloud Functions allows you to run little snippets of code on Google Cloud, and it can do everything from processing to maybe you have like an image come into your cloud storage bucket, and that image you want to turn into a thumbnail, and that's where a Cloud Function can really play a big role. You can also use it for very minor things like hitting an API and then coming back and then formatting that response and sending it back to your client. So that's really great for web applications and mobile applications. And then there's also authentication. So if you're familiar with OAuth or any other types of like JWT tokens, things like that, this authentication is a lot more seamless than kind of rolling your own OAuth 2.0 like authentication. If you're familiar with Cognito, this would probably be something similar to that, where it's kind of a fully managed service for you. You kind of just like plug and play. It has really good built-in functionality, and it'll allow you to do authentication with your apps with just a little bit of code. There's also this thing called in beta called MLKit. So MLKit is machine learning for mobile developers, right? So machine learning has been around for a long time, but it hasn't really been accessible to our phones. And so now with MLKit by Firebase and by the Google Cloud, we can actually use machine learning on our mobile devices, and that's kind of it's beta, but this is going to probably be into regular release sometime in the near future. And then from there, I'm excited to see what else they build, maybe like augmented reality, virtual reality, things like that, ways to kind of hook into this new technology and kind of take advantage of the power of your smartphone, right? And then we also have things, these are more like tool sets for after you release your app, you want to basically know how it's running, right? You want to be able to monitor it. So for that, we have something called Crashlytics. So this allows you to fix bugs and also see real-time crash reports on your applications. And there's also something cool called performance monitoring, right? So this allows you to gain insight into how your code's actually running. So if you have some bottleneck in a script file and have a couple functions which are slowing your entire process, you can find that out and you can kind of cut the fat out of your application. There's also something called Test Lab. So if you're familiar with something called Device Farm for AWS, it allows you to test applications across multiple devices, computers, without actually you having to have the physical hardware, side by side. You can kind of spin it up on these devices, see how it runs, and all that good stuff. For growing your business, and this is a big thing, once you have an application, once it's released, once you have the monitoring in place, you have the database, you have the scaling, you have the authentication, everything else with it, then you need to be able to run analytics. You need to be able to use those analytics to basically see how people are using your app, so you can increase the usage, keep their attention for longer, all things like that. That's why Google Analytics comes kind of pre-built into Firebase. And you also have something called predictions. So this allows you to define dynamic user groups based on predicted behavior. So like, let's say a group of users is doing something similar, it'll automatically kind of group those together. There's also A/B testing. So if you're familiar with software development, you know that there's this concept called A/B testing, where A is, let's say, background blue, B is background red. You test A, you test B, you see how it performs, and that's A/B testing. And so Firebase comes pre-built with that. There's also this idea of cloud messaging. Cloud messaging is a service that they have which allows you to send messages and notifications directly to users. If you're familiar with Android development or mobile development, you could think of those as like push notifications. There's also remote configuration. So basically, you can modify your app without deploying a new version of it. So that's interesting. I haven't really seen much of that in my own experience. What I would say about that is like it sounds almost like you're running like Lambda. And like, so let's say you're making a Lambda function on AWS, and then you want to change that code. They actually have a text editor where you can change it without redeploying your entire application, although it does run into issues because you have a team in real life, right? And that team has the local version on their computer. And if you're changing code inside of the console, it's basically going to get out of sync for every local version, right? So that's why we use Git, that's why we use source control. So I'll have to dive deeper into this thing called remote configuration right here and actually see what that's all about. Dynamic links. So basically it says drive growth by using deep links with attribution. So not too sure what that means. I'll have to dive into that more. App indexing. So you can drive search traffic to your mobile app. So let's imagine that this is something like Elasticsearch with AWS. Obviously Elasticsearch is it's part of AWS because they created a platform for it, but it's not actually part of a cloud provider like that. Basically what it does is it allows you to search text and create these indexes, which allows you to kind of like filter text and things like that. So it sounds like this actually has that built in. So yeah, that's awesome. Scrolling down just so we can get the full view of what Firebase does. So past the services and past the products that Firebase offers, there's also integrations right out of the box. So Google Ads, AdMob, Slack, BigQuery. So BigQuery is a service that Google Cloud has, and it offers for running things like really, really huge queries. For a startup or for someone that's not actually doing that type of like heavy processing like that, for like data analytics, you probably won't actually be using BigQuery too much. But it's good to know that it's there because they offer this thing called Google Analytics and predictions. These are different things that you can probably plug into BigQuery along with a few other services listed above, and kind of make these really insightful, large data set queries. So that's super cool. Data Studio allows you to visualize that data. So once you have that data, then you want to be able to see it. You want to be able to give it to a team or to someone who can kind of find insights in it, and that's where Data Studio really comes into play. Scrolling down a little bit more. So it says solutions to common challenges. Let's kind of read what this says. So rolling out new features. So in software development, there's a concept called rolling deployments. And so you have rolling deployments because when you release new code, you don't want that code to break everything else, right? So what this sounds like is that they actually have a concept called traffic shifting. So what that means is, let's say you have two versions of your app. You have version A and version B. Version A has 100% of the traffic. Version B has your new code, right? So you can shift that entire thing over to version B, but if it has broken code, it's going to break every user experience. So instead of doing that, what Google recommends as a best standard is you want to release it on a rolling basis, right? So roll it out to 10% of users, then roll it out to 20% and 40% and 80% and so on, monitoring it the entire time with automatic rollbacks in place. So in case version B breaks, you can roll back to version A and everything's good to go. It looks like there's also onboarding flow here. So give users a simple, secure way to sign into your app. So we covered that above. That's their authentication, the Firebase authentication. Add chat to your app. So this uses a real-time database, cloud messaging. Cloud messaging sounds, like I said, push notifications. If you're familiar with AWS, it sounds a lot like SNS as well. So for sending notifications, things like that. Down here, we just have some code that we can look at. So Firebase supports Swift, Objective-C, Java, JavaScript, C++, and Unity out of the box. I'm sure there's also some Go. I'm not sure why that's not listed here, but maybe it doesn't support Go, but that's a good opportunity for them to move into that, considering Go is what Google kind of pushes. So Firebase Auth, basically what this does is a quick function, and you can see it's only a few lines, but what it allows you to do is verify whether a user is logged in or not logged in. So that's really powerful. Also, writing to a database. This is only a couple of lines. It allows you to read and write from a database. Subscribe. So subscribing a user to a notification topic. Topics, that has to do with you have users, you subscribe them to a topic. That topic is, let's say, news. And so when a news story comes in, all the subscribers get that news story sent to their email or get sent to the application. However you want to end up doing that. Basically, subscribers subscribe to a topic. The topic creates basically new messages, and those messages get sent out across the subscribers. So logging a custom analytics event. So like we saw above, they have cloud analytics, Google Analytics. If you want to actually start logging those analytics as it comes through, you can do that with kind of a one-line statement there. Saving an image to cloud storage. We talked about this before. So when you upload an image on your application, it gets saved in cloud storage, right? And so that's what this code cover here. And then past that point, you can actually have triggers on that cloud storage bucket. So when the image comes in and saves, it'll then trigger a cloud function. That cloud function will then take that image. It will then create a thumbnail or maybe run machine learning on it. And then it'll send back it'll basically store something in the database, let's say, right? So this is kind of a common use case that you'll find, and you can see it's only a couple of lines here, and you can kind of perform this very powerful, take your image from your application, store it in a bucket, and you're off, right? And then down here, if we scroll a little bit further, we can see that it's trusted by a lot of apps. So the big one that jumps out to me is Lyft. There's also Shazam, Duolingo. If you're like learning any languages, that's an app on mobile and web, and a few other apps. So some of these are very high traffic apps, and they're using Firebase to kind of maintain this. And the big thing behind it is that when you use something like Firebase, when you use serverless in general, you're cutting out this whole thing of like overhead. You're cutting out the need for every single developer on your team to know how to scale to hundreds of thousands of users, millions of users. Instead, you take advantage of the engineering talent and the time and energy that's gone into Google Cloud or Amazon Web Services, and you can kind of let them do the heavy lifting there. So yeah, so this was Firebase intro. So we kind of covered everything that the Firebase documentation has on the front page. In future videos, we're going to dive into some of the nitty-gritty details and start actually working with some of the code. So I hope you got a lot out of this. I sure did, just kind of doing the video. Thanks. This was Ryan Jones with Serverless Guru. I will see you next time.